So in this episode of Reaper for Radio, we're going to be tackling some of the reasons why I'm telling you that this is the ultimate DAW for public radio producers and for podcasters. And I'm calling this just got awesome. And that's because in this tutorial, we're going to be customizing Reaper to make it do exactly what we want it to do. So couple things we're going to be tackling, and this is a gross simplification of what we're going to be doing. This is going to be a tutorial that is more follow along with me and less just go out there and try it, because some of this does get just a tad technical, and I encourage you to try out these techniques after the fact, and you might want to have your hand ready on the pause button in the meantime, because first what we're going to do is we're going to tackle simplifying the main view of Reaper to have it show just what we need and not what we don't. The next thing we're going to do is talk about project templates, which allow us to let new projects look exactly like we want them to. Also, some of the default behaviors of Reaper are, well, I guess they're tailored towards music production. And I'm going to show you how to make those do exactly what we want them to do for voice. Also, some of the shortcuts for common Reaper actions can be changed very easily. And I'm going to show you how to do that as promised in previous episodes of Reaper for Radio. And we're also going to create a custom button or two, and we're going to talk about importing and exporting Reaper settings so that if you mess something up, you can go back and change it. All right, so let's just jump in here. And like I said, have your hand on the pause button. I'm also going to have my hand on my notes over here, more so than usual, just because we're going to be talking about a lot of different things in the next half hour. So first of all, I want to show you just what I'm working with here. This is my Reaper setup. And as you first thing you're going to say is you're going to be like, what are all those colors and how do I get them? Or what are all those colors? They're absolutely heinous. I have what is running on here is a theme. It's called Apollo, and it's a theme built for Reaper. Reaper themes are really easy to install and uninstall. But if it's easier for the time being, I'm just going to switch back to the default theme here. So this should be looking a little bit more familiar, but another thing you might be saying is you're saying, like, what are all these buttons doing here? How did you get this main meter? And this is what I'm going to show you. A couple things that I have set up in Reaper that I really like are a main mixer that I can toggle on and off really quickly. So you can see I can just pop it there, pop it not, because I need it sometimes and I don't need it a lot of times. Another thing that I do is I proof all of my episodes of Here Be Monsters through an old speaker from like the 60s or 70s. And the thing about that speaker is that there's only one of them. So I need to be able to toggle mono output on and off really quickly a lot. And these are things that might interest you or might not, but I'm going to show in this episode how to get some of these buttons here and there. So before I do that though, you can see this is a project I was working on. It's a new episode of the show. It hasn't been released yet, but it's about a guy and his journey through faith healing and what that entailed for him as he was recovering from brain cancer. I didn't produce this. A really talented producer named Bridget Burnquist put this together for the show. I'm just doing some tweaks on it now. As you can see, it works pretty well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset Reaper to all of its default configurations, just straight out of the box, because there's a lot of things in Reaper that show up are set up in a way that aren't really conducive for the kind of work we're doing. And I'm just going to show you how to change those. So first things first, you can get rid of this. Don't need to save the settings, and don't need to save the settings. So here on my desktop, I have an icon for resetting Reaper to its default configuration. If you have Reaper installed, you also have this button somewhere. Just search for Reaper, and then in that folder, you'll also see this option right here. And what happens if you double click on it, it asks you to make sure you're sure what you're doing, and you say yes, and then it will load Reaper up, just like it's the first time you ever loaded it. And of course, it will take just a little bit longer. And I'll have to set up my audio configuration. I'll say yes. I'm just going to make this full screen. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about three major areas of Reaper. The first of those is this main project window right here. There's a couple things that you can do in here that will make your life a lot easier. The first of which is that, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to bring in a little bit of audio from that piece, just so we have something to work with. Because as you can see, there's a couple settings in Reaper that come on by default that we do not need. The first of those being that it wants to snap to this grid all the time. And this is really helpful when you're producing music because you can snap to a bar or a measure or a beat. And we don't really need to do that because we're working with voice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the grid lines. And I'm also going to disable the snapping here. And this will allow us to move stuff around freely. This is good. This is very good. Another thing that we really don't need is we don't need these beat markers in here. So you can see here's one measure, one beat, one measure, two. I actually don't know how music works. So I'm just going to quit while I'm ahead. So you can right click on the ruler here. And instead of measures and beats, minutes and seconds, we're just going to change it to minutes and seconds. So you can see I'm here 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes. And as you zoom in, you can see things changing. That's great. Okay, so we've got our project in here. We have the grid lines, we have the snap disabled. One other thing that I like to change on these settings is when you pull the mixer up here and make it bigger, you can see that my meters they're kind of staying the same size here. And that's because when you open them up, it gives you extra room for your track effects and also these things called sends. And fortunately, sends are things that we are probably not ever going to use in our daily life. And so what you can do is you can right click here on the master meter. And if I go in here and I can say, uncheck the FX inserts when the size permits, gives a little bit more space. And if I do the same thing for the sends, now we have big meters. That's a good thing. So now we kind of have the main bit of Reaper set up in a logical way. One other quick thing that I like to do is I like to get rid of all these superfluous buttons, things that we never use. So up here in the main toolbar, I'm going to right click, customize toolbar, and then you can see this window pops up where I have the default toolbar just for reference. And I also have the customized toolbar, which at this point is the same because this is right out of the package. But the thing is that most of these buttons are either so music specific that we're never going to use them, or they are just repeats of things that are really easy to find in the file menu. So like new project, we're not going to need that. Open project, save project. These are all things you can either do with the keyboard in 2 seconds, or they're things that you can do through the file menu very easily. So project settings, probably don't need that either. Undo and redo are just Control Z and Control Y. Don't need the metronome, don't need the crossfade. Grouping, you might want to use that. Ripple editing, I use 100% of the time. I recommend keeping it up there. Moving envelopes with the media items is something that I want to address in a later podcast about inserting effects into your piece. And this is actually a confusingly named, very common thing that you need to mess with. So I always leave that on there too. The grid, sure. Snapping, probably not. Actually, probably don't even need the grid either. Locking, don't really need that either. So we've gone from, 14 odd options down to 3. And it's as simple as that. We'll be coming back to this view later, but for the time being, much cleaner. Just what you need, nothing you don't. And so now that we have things looking kind of the way that make a little bit more sense, I'm going to hide the mixer here. I'm going to delete this track. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to move on to the second part of this. We're going to start talking about preferences. So now that we have everything blank, I'm going to show you something that you only need to do once. And that is that we're going to make this the default new project, what we see exactly right now. And that's good because by default, snapping is turned on by default. There's going to be grid lines there. And if you want to save yourself a button push or two each time, this is really great. Because what you can do is you can make this a project template. And I've already made one called default, but I'm going to save this as a new one just for kicks here. Let's just put it on the desktop. And we're going to save this as default, typing with one hand here. Default. Sounds good, right? Now let's move on to the second part of this, which is where I'm going to show you the Reaper preferences, which are really helpfully laid out. And I say that because Reaper's preferences have a search bar, and this is so helpful. You're going to see why here in just a minute, because there's a ton of things you can change in here. But what we want to do is we want to make that template that I just created called default. we want to make that the one that loads with every new project. And so you can just type it in here and hit search. Excuse me, you can hit find. So when creating new projects, use the following project file as a template. There we go. Go to my desktop, find default, and now whenever I make a new project, it's always going to use these settings. Whereas if I make a new project right now, you can see that it has these things that we just talked about we don't want. It's also going to have the grid lines and the snapping and all that. But now if I do this and I create a new project, much better. Minutes and seconds, no beats, no locking, no snapping, nothing. Okay, but we're not done with preferences yet because there's a lot of other things in here that we want to change. I'm not going to go into too many of them right now, but the one thing I did want to show you in here is something that I promised in a previous episode, and that is the default zoom behavior. The default zoom behavior in Reaper is frustrating for a couple reasons, but I'll just show you what happens when I drag in this. When I drag in this interview right here, right? So I'll make this a little bit bigger. And so right now, if I use the scroll wheel in the main view, which is how you zoom in and how you zoom out, you can see that it is defaulting to the cursor. But if I see this and say this is an that I want to cut out, and I know it's there, what I would have to do in this situation is I'd have to click in a blank space, then use the scroll wheel, and it zooms in straight on the cursor. And I think this is frustrating because I want to just be able to move my mouse over here and zoom in. But you can see if I zoom in and it's over here, it's still going over to the cursor, right? And so it's just an extra click that I have to do. So to save a lot of time, what I've found is that you can change the default zoom behavior. So I'm going to type in zoom here. I think we're going to have to go through just a couple of these. So, okay, so there's the vertical zoom center. What we're looking for is the horizontal zoom center. And what you can do with this is you can change it to, instead of going to the cursor, to go to the mouse cursor. Excuse me, instead of going to the edit cursor, you can have it go straight to the mouse cursor. So now when I zoom out, it follows my mouse. And when I zoom in, it follows this way. Incidentally, this is also a really good way to get across your project quickly. And I say that because you can hold your mouse over on this side of the screen. If I want to go back to the beginning of the project and zoom out, I can go over here with the left side of the screen and I can zoom in and I can move across the project really quickly that way. It's a little bit more intuitive than, maybe less intuitive, but a lot faster than having to go down here for this scroll bar all of the time. And so it's a really easy way to get around. Again, that's going into the preferences and searching for zoom. You look for the horizontal zoom center. Okay, and just as a kind of a funny example of how much you can customize in Reaper, there's a section here in the general settings called Advanced UI/System Tweaks. And that Reaper splash screen that comes up every time you start the program, you can actually change that. So say you wanted your splash screen to be a picture of cornbread every time you open up the program. You say, okay, I can close out of this. And now when I open up Reaper, you can see a nice picture of cornbread shows up. All right, so we're doing pretty well so far. There's a ton of other things you can change in the preferences. I just wanted to show you those quick changes that really can improve your usability. The next and last section I want to show you in Reaper as far as customization goes is what's called the actions list. And the actions list is probably the most intimidating of the three that I've shown you so far. And that's because this is one of the most powerful pieces of Reaper. And once you understand the format of how it's laid out, it's really not that bad. So what you get that is up in the actions menu, and it's just that first option. You can see that the keyboard shortcut for it is question mark. So you have to hit the shift, but just question mark. And here's a list of every single action that Reaper can perform, every single thing you can do in Reaper. And you're like, well, how does this help me? There's like 12,000 things in here. Well, turns out most of these you don't really need to worry about, but there are a couple. There are a couple that I'm going to show you how to change that are really helpful. And so I'm going to drag this in here one more time. There we go. I'm going to drag this in here one more time. I'm going to show you a couple things that I think really make the program a lot more conducive for editing interviews. The first of those things is promised, as promised in the last tutorial, is the V key. And as we were talking about envelopes, I mentioned that the V key in Reaper is defaulting to the volume envelope. And it seems to make sense, yeah, right? That's helpful. But the one thing about the volume envelope is that unlike the volume prefs envelope, the volume envelope does not let you see changes in the waveform, where this lighter green volume prefs absolutely does. And I think this is a really helpful tool for editing interviews because it gives you a better idea of the relative sound that's coming out of your speakers. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that default key mapping. So right now, again, I have the V key, which I'm hitting right now, set up for the volume envelope. That's how it comes out of the package. But if I go over here into the actions menu, this is a list of every single thing that Reaper can do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a shortcut, right? So the V key, it just jumps right to it. The V key is currently mapped to toggle track volume envelope visible. And so the volume envelope key V, you can see down here in the shortcut section that that is the V key again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that setting. And instead of the volume envelope, I'm looking for volume. Not very good at typing with one hand. Volume prefs. And so now we're just down to a couple different choices. And so this is the exact same thing, except with the prefs envelope instead of the post effects or just volume envelope. And so if I want to change this, all I have to do is go down here into add. And this little window comes up. I'm going to say V. And now you can see, if I'm not mistaken, the lighter green envelope should show up when I hit the V key instead of the dark green. And this is our prefs envelope. And that's as hard as it is to change a keyboard shortcut in Reaper. The really cool thing about this is that as you change all of these things, they will also be reflected in the menu's shortcuts, because the next thing I want to change, also as promised in a previous episode, is the default action for the marker shortcut, the M shortcut. Because what Reaper defaults to is when you hit M, it's just going to throw in a numbered marker, which isn't super helpful. Because as you're tracking an interview, it's really nice to be able to throw in the M key, have a little screen pop up, type in exactly what's happening, hit enter, and just keep going. Whereas now you have to do it, you can still do it, you just have to do Shift M, and then it will bring that up. But let's switch that around so that it's more easy to throw in a named marker as opposed to an unnamed marker. So there's a couple different ways we could do that. We could either type in marker up here into the search, but you'll see that a ton of different options show up. So again, I think the easier option is just to go into M, and then it will bring us right exactly to where that shortcut pops up in the actions menu. So I'm going to do pretty much the same thing here. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to delete that shortcut for insert marker at current position. I'm also going to delete the Shift M, insert marker, insert and or edit marker at current position. And I'm going to add the shortcut M. I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know by all means. So now, as you can see, when I go into the insert menu, now insert marker prompt for name is defaulting to M. It's pretty nice. We'll call this part good. Then you can just do the same thing. You can say, delete this. You can say talking about oranges or whatever you want. Okay, I want to show you one more thing in here, but you can spend all day doing this, and that's the cool thing. And when you're experimenting around in the actions, window, there's not a whole lot to lose, which is really nice. Because if you want to make sure that you've got the right one, because some of them are very similar looking, right? If you want to make sure you've got the right one, you can just run it once, and you can always undo that. So say I wasn't quite sure what this option was, lock track controls. I can just click it. I can click run, and you're like, oh, that grays everything out. Probably don't want to do that. So I just hit Control Z, and it's back. So this is really nice. And so the last thing I want to show you is I want to show you a command that I use all the time, which is ripple editing. So we're going to go into ripple edit here, and you can see that cycle ripple editing mode. And remember, there's 3 ripple editing modes. There's disabled, there's per track, and there's all tracks. And so instead of doing that, because I'm not going to hit Alt P, I just want something that I can have on my left hand so that it's easy to hit while I'm editing. So I'm just going to delete Alt P, and instead I'm going to replace it with R. R for ripple, right? But the one problem with this is that R is already mapped to something. It's mapped to the repeat button. Fortunately for us, repeat isn't something that we're going to be using a whole lot of in radio, and the button's always right there, so you can click it if you need it. So I'm not too worried about this. So I'm just going to say yes. And so now, instead of having to go up here into the ripple, I can just have my hand on the R, and I can cycle through. It's nice to have that button there still, though, because now I can see exactly which mode I'm in, so that I don't mess anything up unnecessarily. So I think we're doing pretty well. There is one more thing I wanted to show you, though, as far as creating custom things goes, because I had that, you remember when I opened up my version of Reaper, I had that big mixer off to the right, and I think that's exceptionally helpful when I'm working on volume for tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this window that we were earlier, just right-click, Customize Toolbar, and you can see that you have the option in here in your Customize Toolbar to add a new button. So if I click that, it brings up the Actions window. See, this is all coming full circle now. And what I can do in the Actions window is I can search for any option in the program, and then it will make a new button just specially for that I can put up in the main toolbar. So I can't remember exactly which one it is, but I'm going to look for it. I know it has to do with the mixer. I know it has to do with the master track. So it must be a toggle to toggle it on or off, and it must be something to do with the master track. Let's see what I've got here. Mixer. Here's what I want. I want in the mixer, I want toggle master track in docked window. You also do it in a separate window, which is fine. But the docked window is kind of nice because you never have to resize it. So all I have to do is I have to say select. I can close this now. And now if I were to save this menu, I would have this button up here for toggle master. And I think it's going to show up somewhere weird when I do this. It's going to show up down here in the this is what's called the docker down here. It's also where the mixer shows up. So that's not what I want. But now what I can do is I can just click down here on this little exclamation point, and I can tell it where I want it to be. So I'm going to throw this off to the right-hand side of the screen. And so there it is, off on the right-hand side of the screen. And now when I'm playing around with stuff,
And I was in my mother's house.
it shows there, and I can shoot right for that -6 target that I'm always going for. But one other option you have is that if you don't like this text label on your button, you can go in here and change the icon. And it will take a second for it to load all of your different icons, but you can have it be whatever you want, which is pretty nice. And so let's find a good one here. There's a duck. We'll do the duck. So now when I save this, now if I click the duck, it will either show or hide my master mixer. That's really nice. I use this all the time. Okay. So wrapping up, I just want to mention that one thing that you're going to want to do as you're messing around with this stuff, and by all means I encourage you to mess around with this stuff, is that if you run into a configuration that you really like, what you're going to want to do is go back in here into the preferences, and remember that's Control P or Apple P, and when you're in the preferences here, you're going to want to export your configuration. And you want to do this because this will save every single one of your settings. And this is how I do it for the tutorials, because I don't want to go through and rechange every single setting I've ever made every time I want to make a tutorial. But what you want to do is check all of these boxes. It will take it a second, and then you can click Save. And then I date and name all of my backups. I try to do about one a month. You can see I'm not doing too well here. And then I'll name this delete because I don't really care about these settings. and then it will take a minute. It will scroll through like a million different files, and then you'll have something that you can save or send to your friends or email to yourself, or just keep on your computer in case you mess anything up. So 1,800 files in that Reaper configuration. Fortunately, they all fit in there really nicely. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my previous configuration because I like the way I had things set up before. So I can just open that. Don't care about this program. And it's going to take a minute for it to change every single thing in Reaper. I'm going to import it. You have that nice Richard Avedon portrait show up. And lo and behold, I have everything the way I like it. Look at that. And so that's that. In conclusion, let me just make sure I covered everything. So yeah, in conclusion, I've covered just a scratch on the surface of this. I'm going to do a whole nother tutorial about what you can do in Reaper to make your life easier as a public radio producer or a podcaster. But I also want your suggestions. I want your suggestions about what you wish Reaper could do for you that it isn't already. And I'll address those in the future tutorials. Also, if you're not the sort of mucking around type, if there's enough demand for it, I will happily post my own Reaper configurations, which are much more involved than what I've just shown here. I'll post those online somewhere for people to download for free. So if that's something you're interested in, just let me know. And if there's enough of it, I'll certainly post that for anyone who's interested. And finally, I'd like to do this on each show, so forgive me. Just a quick pitch for my own work. It's a podcast called Here Be Monsters. This is a really great episode that came out. You also heard just tiny little snippets of some stuff for season 2 of the show. You can find this over at hbmpodcast.com. We're just about to launch a series of new shows, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, enjoy your time editing in Reaper, and as always, feel free to contact me via YouTube or via email. You can email me at reaper@jeffemtman.com. In the meantime, enjoy editing and stay tuned.